Hello, I'm Katherine from the Principles for Responsible Investment. I'd like to thank Simon Fraser University for hosting this event and tabling this topical and crucial debate. I'd like to set out how and why economic inequality can be material for investors and some possible responses to the issue. At PRI, we've been working on the various issues that make up this jigsaw puzzle topic, producing guidance on corporate tax responsibility and how to engage with investee companies, and engaging on anti-bribery and corruption, and various publications on gender diversity, exec remuneration, and labour standards. However, since the middle of last year, our research programme has been working with the Initiative for Responsible Investment at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. This brief presentation draws from a discussion paper on the topic. Our goal in organising a set of global roundtables in London, New York, Singapore, Tokyo, Sydney and Johannesburg is to learn how investors can approach a complicated topic like economic inequality, which is important to issues of economic growth, investment performance and social cohesion, but for which there's not always a clear role for investors how to play in their relation to civil society, government, corporations and other stakeholders. We're using opportunities like this event to frame the research and contribute to the report that we'll be working on. We hope this prompts discussion and look forward to learning from you how major global topics like economic inequality potentially inform your own work, and I'm personally interested in what the rest of the panel has to say. Firstly, some definitions. Economic inequality is the gap between rich and poor, both in terms of income and wealth. It can be understood as both a macro and a micro issue. One way to think of it is as a paradigmatic example of the S in ESG, in the same way that the E is a central concern for climate change, that is. It's apparent on a systemic level between countries, within countries, between different levels of society affecting households and individuals. It also relates to issues around diversity and opportunity, such as gender, disability, age, ethnicity, and education. A plethora of reporting suggests that despite a growth in the world's middle class, in-country economic inequality is increasing in both developed and developing nations. It's entered the mainstream political discourse and is increasingly the subject of scrutiny. These bars represent the growth of in-country income inequality. You can't really see the countries there, but I'll point out the far right is the United States. It's the rise of the 1%. Notice that it's been growing in all these countries, but at different rates, and this suggests that the growth of inequality is a global phenomenon, but that local political and cultural environments affect the shape that growth takes. There are a number of reasons to tackle economic inequality. In the first place, there is new research suggesting that at high levels, economic inequality can harm economic growth, overturning conventional wisdom on the topic. This slide is a quote from research by the IMF, which suggests that the economic effect of trickle-down, when the income of the top 20% increases, that GDP actually declines. It seems that stimulus from the bottom up is more beneficial. The economist James Galbraith uses the metaphor of blood pressure. Too little inequality, and the economy is sluggish, but too high inequality may be a sign of an impending problem. Two major political events of the last year, Brexit and the result of the US presidential election, have been described as manifestations of the risks associated with economic inequality. I'll go into economic equality and growth more, but I'd like to show a short 2-minute video of Mark Carney, who will say it better than I will and much shorter.
Many citizens in advanced economies are losing trust in the system. To them, measures of aggregate progress bear little resemblance or little relation to their own experience. And rather than a new golden era, globalization is associated with low wages, with insecure jobs, with stateless corporations, and striking inequalities. And these anxieties have been compounded by the crisis at the heart of finance. When the financial crisis hit, the world's largest banks were shown to be operating in a heads-I-win, tails-you-lose bubble. There was widespread rigging of some core financial markets exposed, and masters of the universe became minions. Few in positions of responsibility took theirs, while the taxpayers and citizens paid the heavy price. And a consequence of all of these developments, public support for open markets is waning. Now, I'll make no apology by saying that turning our backs on open markets would be a tragedy, but it is a possibility, and it's a threat that can only be averted by confronting the underlying reasons for it up front. A cry for more inclusive growth starts with a crisis of growth itself. To put it mildly, the performance of the advanced economies over the past decade has consistently disappointed.
There you have it. New research, as I mentioned earlier, links economic inequality to reduced economic growth. In it together, Why Less Inequality Benefits All, is work by the OECDs from 2015, and they say, for many OECD countries, inequality is today at its highest since data collection started. This long-run increase in income inequality does not only raise social, political, but also economic concerns. Income inequality tends to drag down GDP growth, and it is the rising distance of the lower 40% from the rest of society that accounts for this effect. In contrast to past conventional wisdom, there isn't the essential trade-off between equality and growth. We can see that in circumstances of excessive inequality, policies to promote equality can improve economic performance. Some of the most commonly cited factors of how economic inequality impacts growth are reduced demand, as the very wealthy do not spend much of their income and wealth as those who have less. There's also wage stagnation and a reduced ability to save for retirement. Reduced investment in people, as inequality hampers efforts to work in underinvested places and underserved communities. Financial instability. The global financial crisis in some markets looked like the substitution of credit bubbles. In the US, for instance, in housing, as a way to support family incomes that had not benefited from economic growth. Political, economic, and social instability. Many are interpreting the result of the US election as a rejection of business as usual. From those who've benefited less from growth, this is the same for Brexit, and there are other global examples too. And I'm waiting with bated breath on the outcome of forthcoming European elections, the rise of populism in Austria, France, the Netherlands, and what will happen in Germany. Finally, rent-seeking and political capture. The idea that inequality brings political power to those with the most resources, and they can affect rules, regulations, and practices to consolidate their position. Rising inequality has important negative consequences for people. Inequality can reduce health, education, and other measures of well-being. The question for responsible investors is, how should they think about this issue, and what can they do to integrate it into their work, and potentially to mitigate economic inequality's growth? The discussion paper lays out some potential options, and clearly more work needs to be done as investors begin to understand the business case. In the first place, economic inequality harms economic growth. It can create risks in your investment portfolio, since companies with unequal pay scales may face consumer resistance or underinvest in their workforce, which in turn has poor long-term outcomes. We've seen this in apparel supply chains, where underinvestment can lead to catastrophes, such as at Rana Plaza. In our work on ESG and fixed income, inequality may be a way to underwrite sovereign bonds. More unequal societies potentially carry greater risk. This is the first step in responsible investment, ESG analysis to review company and ecosystem risk, and economic inequality is an additional consideration to make that analysis more robust. There may also be opportunities for investors to participate in mitigating economic inequality. The Dutch pension fund PGGM invests in workforce housing in the UK as a way to help preserve secure housing in the market under pressure. Globally, pension funds associated for the Committee of Workers' Capital have begun projects on how investors can identify and support quality job creation. For instance, infrastructure investment as a pathway to good and stable employment. The question becomes how to integrate these standards into investment protocols and in corporate engagement. Investors may work more closely with government and development finance institutions on these kinds of investments, blending different kinds of capital to intentionally promote outcomes that mitigate inequality, supporting the growth of new jobs through small business development and the like. Impact investing has approached this through collaborations on investing in underserved or disaster-affected regions, and globally, development institutions like the Inter-American Development Bank and also the Japan International Cooperation Agency, the Quality Infrastructure Development Programme, has a clear role to play in mitigating inequality. There are also issues related to inequality that are directly linked to financial markets. As an example, let's talk about the US. The increasing role of finance in the US economy has been linked to inequality, both because of the concentration of resources and growth in financial institutions, and because of the growth of financial trading and activity that can seem removed from its impact on the real economy. The case of high-frequency trading, where investors use technology to buy and sell companies in microseconds, has become the example. It's hard to argue that such trades are made on the basis of the long-term value of the companies in question. From the perspective of responsible investment, this reinforces the need for investors to think about the structure of financial systems. One guide is the United Nations Environment Programme, the UNEP inquiry's work, that is, on the financial system we need. This is a collective action problem in which investors will have to engage. Economic inequality can help point to the places in the system where it's underperforming. Onto the role of investors in broader policy discussions. Investors will not deal with this major global issue by themselves. The goal here is to see, firstly, how they should integrate new research on inequality into their decision-making, and what role they can play in supporting better long-term outcomes for investors and society alike.